The macabre history of the Sutters. They locked 6 kids in a tunnel with no exit the morning of March 15th, 2024. Began like any other for geologist Dr. Amanda Chun as she surveyed the remote woodlands of Jefferson County, West Virginia. She had been commissioned by the State Environmental Agency to assess the stability of old mining tunnels throughout the region, part of a broader initiative to prevent sinkholes and ground collapses that had plagued rural communities for decades. Sutter property had been abandoned since 1987, its 150 acres of dense forest and crumbling structures slowly being reclaimed by nature. Local records indicated that the land had been home to several small mining operations in the early 1900s, most of which had been sealed or had naturally collapsed over time. What Dr. Chun discovered that morning would unearth a horror that had been buried for 37 years. Using ground-penetrating radar, she detected an anomaly approximately 200 yards behind the ruins of the old Sutter farmhouse. The reading suggested a void space much larger than typical mining remnants, with structural supports that appeared to be artificially maintained rather than naturally deteriorated. More disturbing were the metal signatures that indicated the presence of modern materials in what should have been a century-old excavation. When Dr. Chun's initial probe broke through the surface, the smell that escaped from the opening made her stagger backward in revulsion. It was the unmistakable odor of human decay, mixed with something else, the musty scent of long-confined air and human habitation. Her hands trembling, she called the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, reporting what she feared might be a crime. Scene of unprecedented magnitude. The Sutter family had been the subject of local speculation for decades. Caleb and Meredith Sutter had moved to the property in 1982 with their 2 young children, presenting themselves as simple folk seeking a quiet life away from the corruptions of modern society. They homeschooled their children, rarely came to town, and kept to themselves with an intensity that made neighbors uncomfortable. Over the years, the family seemed to grow larger, though no one could quite explain how. Occasionally, residents of nearby Pine Ridge would glimpse additional children on the property, thin, pale figures who would quickly disappear if anyone approached. When asked about the extra children, the Sutters would provide vague explanations about visiting relatives or temporary fostering arrangements that never seemed to require official documentation. The mystery deepened in 1987 when the Sutter family vanished entirely. Their farmhouse was found empty, with no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Personal belongings remained untouched. Meals sat half-finished on the kitchen table, and livestock wandered freely in their enclosures. Local authorities conducted a perfunctory investigation, but with no evidence of foul play and no missing person reports filed. The case was eventually classified as a voluntary disappearance. What no one suspected was that the Sutters hadn't left at all. They had simply moved their operations underground. When the emergency response team finally gained access to the tunnel system Dr. Chin had discovered, they found a horror that defied comprehension. The original mining tunnel had been extensively modified and expanded, creating a subterranean complex that stretched for nearly half a mile beneath the forest floor. The tunnels had been reinforced with stolen construction materials and equipped with a crude but functional ventilation system that explained how the space had remained habitable for decades. But it was the living conditions within the tunnels that revealed the true scope of the Sutters' crimes. 6 separate chambers had been carved out of the rock and earth, each barely large enough to house a human being. The walls were covered with scratch marks, desperate attempts by the imprisoned children to claw their way to freedom. Makeshift beds constructed from stolen blankets and clothing filled the cramped spaces, along with buckets that had served as primitive sanitation. The first chamber contained the skeletal remains of what appeared to be a young girl, aged approximately 8 to 10 years old. Her bones showed signs of malnutrition and several healed fractures, suggesting years of abuse before her death. Carved into the wall above, where her body lay, were the words, "Jenny wants to go home," etched with what appeared to be a fingernail or small stone. The second chamber held the remains of 2 children, their bodies intertwined in what seemed to be a final embrace. The smaller skeleton showed evidence of developmental abnormalities consistent with being raised in complete darkness, while the larger one bore signs of injuries that suggested attempts to protect the younger child from harm. Personal items. Found with the remains a broken plastic toy car and a handmade doll fashioned from rags painted a heartbreaking picture of children trying to maintain their humanity in impossible circumstances. The third chamber revealed the most disturbing discovery yet. Unlike the others, this space contained evidence of recent habitation. Fresh food containers, modern clothing, and a journal written in childish handwriting indicated that someone had been living in the tunnels as recently as 2023. The journal entries, written by someone identifying themselves only as number 4, described a life of unimaginable isolation and fear. The entries painted a picture of systematic abuse orchestrated by the Sutters, who had apparently spent decades capturing and imprisoning children in their underground prison. The children were referred to only by numbers, stripped of their identities, and treated as property. They were fed scraps, given minimal water, and subjected to psychological torture that included being told they were monsters who deserved their captivity. The journal revealed that the Sutters had maintained their operation well into the 2020s, with Caleb and Meredith aging into their 70s while continuing to imprison children beneath their property. Their own biological children had been indoctrinated into the system, helping to maintain the tunnels and guard the captives. The family had created a multi-generational dynasty of abuse that had operated in complete secrecy for over 4 decades. As investigators worked to map the full extent of the tunnel system, they discovered evidence of at least 12 different victims over the years. Some had died from malnutrition or disease, their bodies buried in unmarked graves throughout the forest. Others had apparently been killed when they became too weak to work or too defiant to control. The Sutters had treated human life as completely disposable, viewing their captives as tools to be used and discarded at will. The fourth chamber contained a horrifying workshop where the Sutters had forced the children to manufacture illegal goods for sale. Evidence suggested they had been running a counterfeiting operation, forcing malnourished and traumatized children to produce fake identification documents, currency, and other materials that the family sold to criminal networks. The children's labor had funded the expansion of the tunnel system and provided the Sutters with income while they remained hidden from society. The fifth chamber served as a punishment cell, where defiant children were subjected to extended periods of isolation and torture. The walls were covered with increasingly desperate messages from victims who had been confined there, their handwriting deteriorating as malnutrition and despair took their toll. Some messages were prayers, others were final goodbyes to families they would never see again. But it was the sixth chamber that would haunt investigators for years to come. This space had been converted into a twisted mockery of a family room, where the Sutters had apparently gathered with their captives for what they called appreciation sessions. The children had been forced to express gratitude for their captivity, thanking their captors for saving them from the outside world and teaching them the value of submission and obedience. As Chapter 1 concluded, the full scope of the Sutter operation was still being uncovered. The tunnel system seemed to extend even further into the forest, with additional chambers that investigators had not yet reached. But already it was clear that they had stumbled upon one of the most extensive and long-running cases of human trafficking in child exploitation in American history, a nightmare that had been hidden beneath the earth for nearly half a century. The breakthrough in understanding the full scope of the Sutter operation came when investigators discovered the family's meticulous record-keeping system hidden in a sealed section of the tunnel complex. Caleb Sutter had documented every aspect of their underground empire with the precision of a businessman, treating the imprisonment and abuse of children as a legitimate enterprise requiring careful management and planning. The records revealed that the Sutter family had operated what amounted to a human trafficking ring disguised as a reclusive homesteading operation. Over the course of 4 decades, they had systematically targeted vulnerable children runaways, foster children aging out of the system, and undocumented minors who wouldn't be missed by authorities. Their method was always the same: approach desperate children with promises of food, shelter, and family, then transport them to the tunnel system where they would disappear forever. The Journal of Number 4, later identified as Maria Santos, a 17-year-old who had been imprisoned for 3 years, provided crucial insight into the daily operations of the underground prison. Her writings described a hierarchy among the captives, with older children forced to oversee younger ones under threat of severe punishment. The Sutters had created a system where victims became complicit in their own abuse, using fear and manipulation to maintain order without constant supervision. Maria's entries also revealed the true fate of the Sutter family's biological children. Rather than escaping the property in 1987, as authorities had assumed, they had been indoctrinated into the family business as adult partners. David and Sarah Sutter, who had been children when their parents first began their operation, had grown up believing that imprisoning and exploiting other children was not only acceptable but necessary for their family's survival. The discovery of hidden surveillance equipment throughout the tunnel system painted an even more disturbing picture. The Sutters had documented their crimes extensively, creating a video archive that served both as entertainment and as insurance against potential betrayal by their captives. The recordings showed decades of systematic abuse, with each generation of the Sutter family participating in the torture and exploitation of their prisoners. FBI behavioral analysts studying the case determined that the Sutters had created what they termed a generational cult of abuse, a closed system where criminal behavior was normalized and passed down through family lines. The children raised in this environment had no concept of normal moral boundaries, viewing the imprisonment and abuse of others as simply another aspect of family life. The search for surviving victims led investigators to expand their efforts beyond the immediate tunnel system. Using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, they discovered 17 additional burial sites scattered throughout the forest. Each grave contained the remains of children who had died in captivity, their bodies hastily buried without ceremony or identification. The most heartbreaking discovery was a series of letters found in Maria Santos's chamber, written to family members she would never see again. The letters, never sent, described her desperate hope that someone would look for her and her gradual realization that rescue was unlikely. Her final entries documented her plans to escape, including detailed maps of the tunnel system and observations about the guards' routines. Maria's escape attempt had been discovered by the Sutters just days before Dr. Chun's survey team arrived at the property. According to evidence found at the scene, she had nearly reached the surface when David Sutter caught her and dragged her back to the tunnels. The struggle had damaged the tunnel's structural integrity, creating the ground instability that had attracted Dr. Chen's attention and ultimately led to the discovery of the entire operation. The manhunt for the surviving Sutter family members became one of the largest operations in FBI history. Caleb and Meredith Sutter, now in their 80s, were discovered living in a hidden bunker deeper in the tunnel system. Despite their advanced age, both showed no remorse for their crimes, continuing to insist that they had been providing homeless children with shelter and purpose. David and Sarah Sutter had fled when they realized the tunnels had been discovered, but their lifelong isolation had left them ill-equipped to navigate the modern world. They were captured within a week, found hiding in an abandoned warehouse in Maryland, still carrying documentation related to their human trafficking operation. The trial proceedings revealed the full extent of the Sutter empire's reach. Financial records showed connections to criminal networks across multiple states, with the family's counterfeiting operation generating millions of dollars over the decades. The forced labor of their captives had also been used to manufacture illegal weapons, process stolen goods, and maintain marijuana cultivation operations hidden throughout the forest. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that the Sutters had been planning to expand their operation. Plans found in Caleb's possession outlined the construction of additional tunnel systems in neighboring states, with detailed strategies for recruiting and transporting victims. They had viewed their West Virginia operation as merely the prototype for a much larger criminal enterprise. The psychological evaluation of the captured family members provided insight into how normal individuals could evolve into monsters. Dr. Elizabeth Ward, the forensic psychologist assigned to the case, determined that the Sutters had gradually normalized their criminal behavior through a process of incremental moral degradation. What had begun as minor acts of neglect and control had escalated over decades into systematic torture and murder. The recovery of Maria Santos became a symbol of hope in an otherwise devastating case. Despite 3 years of imprisonment and trauma, she had maintained her sanity and humanity through sheer force of will. Her testimony became crucial in convicting all 4 surviving members of the Sutter family, and her courage inspired other survivors of similar crimes to come forward. The investigation expanded to examine potential connections to other missing children cases throughout the region. Investigators discovered that the Sutters operation had likely been responsible for dozens of disappearances dating back to the 1980s, many cases that had been classified as runaways or voluntary disappearances were reopened in light of the new evidence. The convictions of the Sutter family sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide. Caleb and Meredith Sutter were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, though both died within 2 years of their sentencing. David and Sarah Sutter received multiple consecutive life sentences, ensuring they would never again see freedom. The tunnel system was permanently sealed after investigators completed their work, with concrete poured into every chamber and passage. The entire Sutter property was purchased by the state and converted into a memorial forest, with walking trails and markers commemorating the victims of the underground prison. Maria Santos's recovery became a testament to human resilience. With intensive therapy and support from victim advocates, she gradually adapted to life in the outside world. She became a powerful voice for missing children, working with law enforcement agencies to identify signs of human trafficking and speaking at conferences about the long-term impacts of childhood trauma. The Sutter case prompted significant reforms in how law enforcement agencies investigate property disappearances and monitor isolated rural communities. New protocols were established for conducting thorough searches of abandoned properties, and interagency cooperation was improved to prevent criminals from exploiting jurisdictional boundaries. The forest where the tunnel system once operated remains a somber reminder of how evil can flourish in isolation. But the memorial trails that now wind through the woods also represent hope, proof that even the deepest secrets can eventually be brought to light, and that survivors can find the strength to rebuild their lives and help others escape similar fates. The Sutter legacy serves as a dark chapter in the history of American crime, but it also demonstrates the importance of vigilance and the power of accidental discovery to uncover even the most carefully hidden horrors. The 17 trees planted in the memorial grove each bear the name of a victim, ensuring that those who died in darkness will be remembered in the light. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,